The astronaut, who realized Earth was never the same. From hundreds of miles above the surface, the world looks impossibly calm. Borders disappear, noise vanishes, and suddenly, everything you believed about Earth feels fragile. Most people spend their lives trying to escape problems on Earth. One astronaut escaped the planet entirely, only to discover something far more unsettling waiting in silence. To understand why this moment still matters today, we need to look beyond rockets and missions. Spaceflight was never just about exploration. It was about perspective. And perspective, once changed, cannot be undone. In an age where humanity feels more divided than ever, one realization from orbit still echoes through modern life. The astronaut had trained for years. Simulators, emergency drills, endless checklists. Every variable planned, every scenario rehearsed. What no training prepared them for was what Earth would look like without distance, without politics, without noise. At first, the view felt familiar. Blue oceans, white clouds, a thin curve of atmosphere glowing against the dark. But the longer the astronaut watched, the more unsettling the realization became. This was not a collection of nations. This was not a battlefield. This was not a map of winners and losers. It was a single delicate system floating in a hostile void. The shift didn't happen all at once. It arrived quietly, between routine tasks and scheduled communications. A glance through the window turned into minutes of stillness. Minutes turned into questions no checklist could answer. If Earth was this small, this vulnerable, then everything happening below suddenly carried a different weight. Back home, conflicts raged. Economies strained. News cycles spun endlessly. But from orbit, none of that was visible. There were no lines, no labels, no signs of ownership. Just a shared home, thinly protected by an atmosphere barely thicker than paper. That was the first crack in the story the astronaut had been told their entire life. The idea that separation defined humanity. The idea that borders mattered more than survival. From this distance, those beliefs felt strangely artificial. And as the spacecraft continued its silent path around the planet, another realization began to take shape. This view was not meant for everyone, yet its message applied to all of humanity. What happens when the people who see the truth return to a world that hasn't? That question would follow the astronaut long after the mission ended. The realization deepened with every orbit. Every 90 minutes, Earth rolled beneath the spacecraft again, unchanged, unaware, endlessly turning. Sunrise and sunset arrived in rapid cycles, 16 times a day, each one reminding the astronaut how fragile balance truly was. The mission continued as planned. Experiments were conducted, data was recorded, messages were sent back to Earth with practiced calm. Yet beneath the routine, something irreversible was happening. The astronaut was no longer observing Earth as a place they belonged to. They were seeing it as something that needed protecting. This experience had a name, though few outside space agencies understood it at the time. The overview effect, a cognitive shift reported by astronauts who see Earth from space. A sudden understanding that life, all life, exists on a thin, vulnerable surface suspended in darkness. But knowing something intellectually is different from feeling it emotionally. In orbit, the feeling was overwhelming. The planet looked alive, breathing through clouds and oceans wrapped in a fragile glow. And beyond that glow was nothing. No safety net, no second chance. What made the experience more unsettling was the silence. Space does not hum. It does not echo. There is no sound to distract the mind. Thoughts become louder. Questions linger longer. The astronaut found themselves staring at storms forming over oceans, watching weather systems that would affect millions, yet powerless to intervene. At the same time, Earth communications continued as usual. Schedules, procedures, casual conversations. From the ground, everything was normal. From orbit, nothing felt normal anymore. The astronaut began to notice how quickly the planet passed beneath them. One country vanished as another appeared. Entire continents slipped by in minutes. The idea of permanence dissolved. Civilization felt temporary, fragile, dependent on cooperation that suddenly seemed far less guaranteed. There was also an unexpected sense of responsibility. If you see the whole, can you ever return to caring only about the parts? If you understand how interconnected everything is, how do you ignore the consequences of division? This was the early conflict taking shape, not between machines or missions, but between perspective and reality. The astronaut knew they would return to Earth. Gravity would reclaim their body. Society would reclaim their attention. But the view from orbit would never release its grip. And with that came an unsettling thought. If more people could see this view, truly see it, would the world still choose the same paths it does now? That question hovered quietly, unresolved, as the spacecraft continued its endless loop around a fragile blue world. As days passed, the conflict grew sharper. The astronaut wasn't just witnessing Earth, they were being changed by it. And change, especially the kind you cannot explain easily, has consequences. Returning messages to Earth began to feel strange. Conversations sounded smaller. Urgent problems from the ground felt disconnected from the reality visible through the window. Arguments about territory, resources, and power seemed absurd against the image of a single planet sharing one atmosphere. This growing distance created an internal tension. The astronaut was still part of the mission, still bound by duty, still expected to perform flawlessly. But internally, a quiet fracture had formed. The person who launched into space was no longer the same person orbiting the planet. There was also isolation. Not physical isolation, but emotional separation. How do you explain a realization no one around you has experienced? How do you compress a planetary perspective into everyday language? The astronaut began to understand that this insight might be something they would carry alone. Then came moments of fear, watching lightning storms flash across entire continents, seeing massive wildfires spread like glowing scars, observing the thin atmospheric layer that protected all life, visibly fragile against the blackness beyond. The astronaut understood that Earth's systems were powerful, but not invincible. Sleep became harder. The mind replayed images of Earth spinning silently below. Thoughts returned again and again to the same question. If humanity could see this fragility clearly, would it change? Or was the problem not ignorance, but choice? The spacecraft itself became a reminder of dependence. Every breath was recycled, every drop of water reused, every failure potentially fatal. The astronaut lived inside a system that mirrored Earth on a smaller scale. Limited resources, shared survival, no room for waste. That parallel was impossible to ignore. The station worked because cooperation was non-negotiable. Every person on board depended on everyone else. Conflict had no place. Failure affected all. And yet, Earth below operated differently. Division was normalized. Short-term thinking was rewarded. Long-term survival was often postponed for convenience. The astronaut began to realize the true conflict wasn't happening in space. It was waiting back home. The challenge wouldn't be surviving orbit. It would be returning to a world that hadn't seen what they had seen. As the mission approached its final orbits, one truth became unavoidable. This perspective could not be forgotten, and it would not fade with gravity. The real test was still ahead. The final days in orbit arrived quietly. There was no dramatic announcement, no sudden shift, just the growing awareness that the view was about to be taken away. On the last orbits, the astronaut lingered near the window longer than usual, watching Earth pass beneath them one final time, memorizing coastlines, storms, the soft glow of the atmosphere against the dark, knowing this perspective would soon exist only in memory. Re-entry came fast. Fire, heat, violence. Gravity returned without negotiation. The planet that once looked so delicate now pressed down with overwhelming force. And just like that, the astronaut was home. But home no longer felt the same. The world was louder, heavier, more divided. Conversations resumed as if nothing had changed. Schedules filled, expectations returned. Yet inside, the astronaut carried a truth that didn't fit easily into daily life. They had seen Earth without borders, without ownership, without hierarchy. A single system, fragile and shared. And once that truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. This wasn't a moment of despair. It was a responsibility, a quiet one, to speak differently, to think longer term, to remember that survival depends on cooperation, not conquest. Today, as humanity faces climate instability, geopolitical tension, and rapid technological change, that orbital perspective matters more than ever. We are still living on the same thin surface, still protected by the same fragile atmosphere, still pretending separation makes us safer. The astronaut understood something most of us never will. There is no backup planet, no escape route, just one shared home, drifting silently through space. And the question remains, long after the mission ends. If seeing the truth can change one person forever, what would happen if more of us truly looked? Subscribe to join the journey